achieving global development goals that were set to be achieved by 2030. We'll focus on sectors in health, education, infrastructure, socioeconomy, agriculture, nutrition, urbanization, so a lot of developmental issues in a global context, and the role AI can play or cannot play to solve these issues. So the format of this panel discussion is such that I will be moderating the discussion, so I'll ask the questions to our guest. Audience are very much encouraged to ask questions, or if you have any remarks, you can make that as well. But we'll focus mostly on these issues and the role of education and technology around these. Yeah, so I guess we can start. I'll start by introducing our speakers, and then we can start the discussion. So first, I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Nama Budathoki. Dr. Budathoki is an executive director at Kathmandu Living Labs. He has played a critical role in developing OpenStreetMap community and creating an ecosystem around open data in Nepal. His team and Dr. Budathoki himself registered Kathmandu Living Lab as a not-for-profit civic technology company in 2013. The lab has played a pivotal role in creating OpenStreetMap of Kathmandu since then. Open Data for Resilience Initiative project was first launched. Dr. Budathoki assembled and led a group of passionate young people, including over a dozen interns from different universities, to map all the educational institutions, health facilities, road network, tangled mesh of gullies, religious sites, and other geographic features of Kathmandu Valley. And in addition to mapping these important features in OpenStreetMap, the team gave or has given dozens of mapping workshops to university students, government officials, tech community, NGOs, and other youth groups. So this has been an amazing initiative in the context of Nepal since the lab started in 2013. Dr. Budathoki received his doctorate from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in USA with a focus in OpenStreetMap. He did his postdoctoral work at McGill University in Canada and has worked previously as the director of programs at NEDI Foundation. So I'll request all of you to join me in welcoming Dr. Budathoki to our discussion here at NAMI today. Our other guest, as accomplished, our guest is Alina Pradhan, Dr. Alina Pradhan. Dr. Pradhan is an economist with the World Bank Group's Health, Nutrition, and Population Global Practice. A chemical engineer by undergraduate training, her graduate work in public health and previous consultancies focus on impact evaluation and decision science as applied to demography, reproductive and maternal and child health in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, including Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Dr. Pradhan's current work in the bank has been focused in Nigeria in reproductive, maternal, and child health service delivery, along with some work in Indonesia, Malawi, Mozambique, Sudan, and Central African Republic. Dr. Pradhan holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology in USA, and a master's and a doctorate in population and reproductive health from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston, Massachusetts, USA as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pradhan to our panel discussion. For our third distinguished guest, we have a familiar face. I'm pretty sure Dr. Neupane doesn't need any introduction here, but I'll still introduce him as one of our distinguished panel guests. Dr. Sujaya Neupane is a postdoctoral researcher at MIT in the Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences in Boston, Massachusetts. He obtained his PhD in neuroscience from McGill University and did his undergraduate and master's degrees in electrical and biomedical engineering. In his postdoctoral work, Dr. Neupane is investigating how we mentally navigate a certain sequence of memorized events or patterns to understand how the brain enables so many flexible behaviors and to complement the development of algorithms that can work as intelligent machines. Dr. Neupane is also very actively involved in educational sector in Nepal. He started an educational research project in a village, Jimpa, located near the western tip of Baglung. This project runs participatory action research to come up with efficient ways to improve learning in middle school classes. We're very highly accomplished and distinguished scholars as our guest in this panel discussion. And please also let's welcome Sujaya, Dr. Neupane as our panelist. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to a very enthusiastic and good discussion around the issues of role of technology in global development. Okay, so I'll start by asking Dr. Barath Hokie here with the first question, and I'm hoping that other panelists will also chime in later on. I guess the first question around the role of technology is just to identify, key areas in these developmental sectors where technology will have the biggest impact in the coming decade in the global scenario.
Thank you. Where is Bishesh? Bishesh, he's the one who sent the email to me the first. I received the first email from Bishesh. Thank you. Thank you, other organization, for invitation to be in the panel. After this very long introduction, it looks like everybody's already sleeping. I want to wake up. That's a really very hard question. I don't feel fully competent to answer that question. I would rather like to shift the question a little bit. You asked what are the areas that technology might have biggest impact in the next decade. I think the right question we should be asking is, which are the area where we need to be working to create a big impact with technology. Because I think technology is cross-cutting. It has potential to impact, to transform a lot of different things. But if you're trying to understand the connection between the upcoming technology and the kind of work we've been doing at my lab, we're focusing disaster, disaster preparedness. If you're specifically talking about the artificial intelligence or the technology, which I've requested you, during the coffee, I would rather want you to broaden the discussion because AI is important. I think it's coming up, but there are also other sort of technologies I think we should cover in the discussion. So, disaster management, because Nepal, we sit in a very highly disaster-prone area. There is a tremendous role for technology to create impact. Aboriginally, in 2015 earthquake, I'll be talking about that in a minute. And I think the governance I think everything is connected to governance. What can I do with technology to make a difference there is probably, I'm very interested to see technology playing some important positive role in transforming our governance, reinventing our government. I stop there and I'll jump in later.
So to add, I think one aspect of the question that I'd like to clarify on is largest impact on whom, right? Our Earth population is about 7.5 billion. Every fifth person is Chinese, every sixth person is Indian. China, India, Nepali. If only China and India were developed, we wouldn't consider that development. So as a Nepali, a low-income country, the bigger question I think is impact for whom? If humankind develops, does that mean that the bottom 10% of the world moves ahead with that technological innovation, right? So that is one question. And my perspective is our advancement as a society is should be measured by how the bottom 10% are doing. How far have the bottom 10% come in the last decade? So if I focus on that, then I think the biggest potential is your mobile and internet, mobile technologies, internet solutions. Some examples that I'll give, M-Pesa in Kenya. So mobile banking was launched in 1999 in the UK. By 2005, Philippines had its own mobile banking system. And then by 2007, Kenya had M-Pesa, which is Kenya ko apne mobile banking system, right? So there's a lot of research that's been done on mobile banking, and especially on Kenya, which shows that it helped women move out of low productivity subsistence agriculture into your non-farm, high productivity business. So my field is health, global health, and within health also, I see a lot of different applications of mobile technology. So for example, the biggest cause of death in developing countries for children under 5 is diarrhea, pneumonia, malaria, right? Almost nobody in the US dies of diarrhea, malaria, pneumonia. I mean, maybe they'll die, but it's because the doctors haven't seen malaria, but there's a very easy algorithm to basically winnow through the symptoms of the child and basically make a decision tree of whether the child has diarrhea, whether the child has pneumonia, severe malaria, and go into that route. So mobile technology has been helping with that. There's an algorithm app in a phone that's called Almanac that even community health workers can use. So in Nepal, we have about 60,000 community health workers. And I'd say they're called female community health volunteers, right? But they have literacy about 8th grade in a public school, right? So any app, any mobile app that you develop has to be usable by somebody who has 8th grade education in Nepal. So I think the biggest impact for me that's interesting will be in mobile technologies. There's already a lot of movement going on. And the biggest question is scale up and context specific development, I think, which is where you guys can very easily come in.
I don't have much experience in development to really answer how technology will impact development or in which sector. But being an engineer myself, I have this learned experience of how engineers think. And there's a problem there. So engineers know how to design things, develop new technologies, and then we go and try to solve problems with that. But when we think of global problems and when you think of sustainable development, the focus has to be the problem that needs to be solved. So this problem should shape technology. The focus should not be the technology which ends up shaping the problem. So I'll share an experience of my learning. During my master's, I did electrical engineering, so I was pretty comfortable with electronics and hardware. And then some people developed Raspberry Pi, if you've heard of that. It's a very low-cost single-board computer, and you could do a lot of things with that low-cost machine. So I came up with the idea of, okay, I can use this computer and use this motherboard and build a computer for $200 and just bring it to my village, and the school can have a computer, very low cost. So I did that. and then everyone was excited, and I thought, oh, this is great, everyone is happy. And then I left, and no one used it after that. Because everyone thought it was a huge deal. There has been no computer in this village ever, and then there's a computer now, you can see people talking on the screen and all these things. So I brought an extra one in case it broke. So the first one broke while I was there, within a week, and the second one also broke after a few weeks. While I was thinking hard about how to design the best low-cost setting, I didn't really think about what would happen if it breaks. Right, so this is just one example of the way engineers tend to think. We think about the technologies too much, which is good, but the focus has to be why we're even doing this, right? So this technology should be shaped by the problem. Now, we've already, I've worked with a few groups yesterday when we're designing ideas to use AI in solving problems. And we really want to use deep learning to solve some problems. So we're thinking really hard how deep learning can adapt to some problems. So we have deep learning and we're trying to come up with problems. But it should be the other way around. We have to just use a problem, you know, if there's something that you really want to work on, pick that and then think how technology can play a role. Maybe technology cannot play a role. Maybe it's a social problem, which is fine. Then there will be other people working on it, not the AI person. But I think the way we think about problems has to be a little bit changed, because especially in AI, it's filled with, you know, this is a frontier driven by engineers and scientists, right? So I think there should be a shift in the way scientists think, and I'm not sure how we bring that.
Yeah, certainly. So I think there are a few themes that emerged throughout your comments in this conversation. Of course, the problem we want to focus on are the challenges in low-income countries. So when we think of a global context, there is a lot of divide between resources available in high-income countries and in low-income countries. And if we focus on the challenges in the low-income countries itself or themselves, I think there are a few themes that were common in all of us here. We talked about disaster preparedness, disaster management. So we have to be ready, and we need technology to help us prepare when we have disaster like the earthquake that we recently had in Kathmandu. But then we also talked about issues around good governance, health-related issues, women empowerment, poverty. We didn't really touch upon nutrition, but that could also be other sector where AI could help us. And then education, as Sujaya mentioned with his example, there's another sector where AI can help. So I want to spend some time just talking through the resources that is available to us now in the context of these areas that we have identified so far, and maybe new other areas that affect low-income countries, and how we can, you know, tap into these resources. What is the state of the affairs? Like, how well are we using what is available to us? So I want to start with Dr. Budathoki again. He has, you know, channeled and mobilized young resources here in Nepal to create OpenStreetMap, and that has played very pivotal role during the earthquake. But then there must be other resources you can think of that we can tap into for the issues we've talked about so far.
I think the biggest resource is young people sitting in front of us. I think there is no other resource that's more important than that. I think it's human resource.
Yeah, of course.
We all know that, and that's somehow connected to the kind of education we give to these people. So this question, this conversation reminds my, undergrad study. That was mid-90s. Many of you were not even born. So let me tell you a couple of stories. So in mid-90s, I was studying computer science, and it was a very new subject. I know many people used to compare computers with typewriters, for example. You haven't seen even typewriters, right? And then I still remember I did have a course in artificial intelligence in the final year, in the 4th year. There's a thick book. And then we had no internet, of course, you know. It was the very early stage. But what I remember now is, you know, the sort of hype, sort of rumors. You know, there will be robots coming in that will do everything, you know, that will do everything that humans are doing. And then we won't need to travel, you know, all sort of things. Because you can do online shopping and all these sort of things. Imagine, you know, some 25 to 30 years ago, when societies did have very limited knowledge, information about these things. And that used to be very fascinating. Oh my goodness, there will be robots coming in our house. We don't need to go to shop. We don't need to, you know, travel. It's difficult for me to communicate that, you know, as I felt. But looks like I really don't know. I'm not following what happened with the AI things since then in between, because that's not my active area of research, nor am I working in that field. But good to know that is now, over the last few years, artificial intelligence, machine learning, self-driving cars, and all these things are coming. But there are a couple of things I would like to mention here. You know, there is what people call, you know, Sujaya indicated, the technological determinism. There is a term, you know. The meaning is a school of thought that people who study technology, you know, they overly emphasize in technology. They think you design new technology, you develop new technology, and that will determine human actions, is one school of thought. That's what people call technological determinism. So technology will determine things. And then let me, you know, take you to 80s when personal computers were, you know, were being popularized. So in US, you know, I didn't know these things before I went to US for PhD, by the way. You know, in US, of course, they started using computers in different sectors. So there was massive failure in computerizations in US in 80s, you know, because personal computers came in and everybody thought, now you do have computer, you computerize everything, then we bring efficiency, everything's better, becomes you know, better, that was the notion. And they began to utilize, you know, to implement technology in a very narrow sense. You know? And then when they failed massively, and they started asking questions, why did we fail? You know? So there is a reason why I'm communicating, you know, I'm sharing this with this young crowd. So, and then there is another school of thought that emerged, and that's what people call social informatics. You know, they started to investigate the reasons why all these systems failed. You know, failure does have their own definitions. You know, I don't want to get into that. And then they found technology is only a piece of, you know, whole ecosystem. You know, we really need to do a lot of other things. You know, technology interacts with society. It's not just technology that determines human actions. Sometimes, you know, the way humans perceive technology also do have, you know, tremendous influence, whether a particular technology is adopted or rejected. You know, there are technologies like Sujaya said, you know, there was computer, there's some system technology, but nobody used it. So you know, I'm now trying to connect this experience to your question. You know, when you talk about resource, you know, is particularly in my area, in my field, is information technology. It's not, you actually do not need massive investment in this field compared to, you know, other fields. You know, a few days ago, I was talking with Began, you know, we were having some chat. Began, what's your plan? And he's, you know, and in his field, it requires a lot of investment, for example. There are fields that require a lot of investment. The computer, you know, at least you can start, if you want to write a software, you want to do certain things, you can begin these things with a very minimal, you know, investment. But the biggest resource that you need is people. People who understand this technology in a broader sense. What is the problem that we want to solve? You know, what are the different elements in the ecosystem? Can we create those? How do these elements interact with each other? These are deep questions that our education institutions do not actually teach. You know, I'm not aware that any school, you know, Polytechnic Computer Science program is actually touching upon some of these very, very important areas. That's something that, you know, I get a little nervous, right? And then, you know, so anyway, to summarize, and I'll have a chance to continue. I'll do that. To summarize, I think the human resource is the most important resource. But that resource is not number of people. It's the people who ask deep questions, people who think about these things, you know. That's something we lack, and you know, but we do have opportunity to, you know, I think, to work on in that area.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And I feel like I should continue in this theme now that we're in human resource and educational theme. And I actually want to ask Dr. Neupane the next question, because he kind of alluded us to that theme along with Dr. Budathoki here. I think what you mentioned earlier and what Dr. Budathoki said, technology should be used as a tool, but not necessarily as an endpoint. So technology as a means to get to a certain endpoint to achieve the goal we want. And in this context, it's education or other issues that we're facing in the global context, especially in low-income countries. So I want to ask about knowledge generation. So could we think of technology as a tool or as something that could help us in generating knowledge, that could help us achieve some of the goals we have been talking about? The idea of training young minds, preparing people, and getting human resources that will help us, you know, solve all these issues. So how do you think we should start thinking about this knowledge generation?
It's a very broad question, but I don't think we should even expect that technology will solve anything. We can use technology to achieve our broader goal, right? It could be a tool to go from one point A to point B, but that itself is not going to solve anything. One way I see, so we have to frame the problem and define the problem, but the question is who is going to do that? The part of knowledge generation is always, first you define the domain of the knowledge, what word you want to work on. But the question is usually ignored, the question about who is going to do that. And so keep that in mind. And then the other thing is, everyone loves democracy, right? Everyone is going towards a democratic society and all these things, and we elect our governments to democracy. But when it comes to doing these kind of decisions, why don't we do the same? So Dr. Budathoki mentioned people, right? There's a very well-studied method in social science called participatory approach, where it's a democratic way of actually formulating problems, coming up with possible ways to solve it. So involve people who are directly affected by the problem. You know, to involve them to formulate the problem in the first place, or formulate a possible solution, for example. So I think we should use a participatory approach if we want to tackle these problems. That's one way to generate knowledge, which is coming from the people who are suffering or bearing the load of these problems. That would be the first step, I would say. Yeah. And just to add to that, then in that discussion, from that approach, if it's concluded, okay, we can use this technology to maybe solve this problem, then of course we can use that technology. But technology itself is not the answer.
Okay, so we'll still keep on to this theme of education, and maybe later we'll join it to health and other sectors. So I want to ask Dr. Pradhan next. Is there a model that we can learn from? So we're talking in the context of low-income countries here, and we're talking about resources, knowledge generation, and areas which might need special attention and where data and technology can help. But can we learn from other existing models now, especially in affluent countries where these issues might not even be there or have been solved a long time ago? How can we think about tech transfer or knowledge transfer and is that even possible?
I think knowledge transfer is possible both ways. I think there's a lot that the East or the developing countries, low-income countries, can learn from high-income countries. And the same is true the other way around as well. There's a lot that high-income countries can learn from low-income countries. I gave some examples early on about the relatively fast spread of mobile banking from UK to Kenya, right? So 1999 to 2007. I mean, it seems like a lot, but 8 years is relatively a very short time for technology to transfer from Europe to Kenya. Another area, I think, is in diagnostics. So I mentioned diagnostics of fever and cough for children under 5. IMCI, it's called ICCM diagnosis method to diagnose whether the child has malaria, pneumonia, or diarrhea. But even in more complex forms of diagnostics, like complex eye problems, I read a couple of months ago that in a big trial, AI, this computerized way of diagnosing eye problems, made 0 mistakes. And they did a pretty big RCT on it, and it proved to be very successful. So that's something that we can easily transport over to Nepal, because eye problems are eye problems. There might be some peculiarities because of our genetics, but there are things that we can very, very easily transport from high income to low income settings. There are areas which are not so easily transferable as well, and there are challenges as well. And I think in both context and political equilibrium, like Namadai said, governance plays a big role. Dr. Neupane mentioned, nobody using that technology after he left. So I think real adoption of a new technology, not just by an NGO that pilots it, but actually by governments, or for example in health, by public health facilities, is I think really important. But yeah, there definitely are knowledge transfers that have happened both ways.
Great. I think we're getting towards talking about challenges. You just started with one, but there must be others as well. So I want to ask our speakers, our panelists, to think through or spend some time discussing the challenges we will face when thinking about knowledge transfer, technology transfer, or just using technology in the context of low-income countries, technology that are predominantly developed in high-income countries, because those countries are more resource-intensive. They have a lot of resources, and it's easier to develop technologies there. But is it possible to transfer? We'll spend some more time talking about that. And if not, what are the challenges we should be thinking about when we need to adopt technologies that are developed for the needs of high-income countries?
Can you
Sure.
repeat your question?
Yeah, so there are a lot of technological advancement in countries with a lot of resources, right? There are really good universities, a lot of monetary resources available, or training, and I think it's usually easier to develop resources or technology in the countries with a lot of ability. And it's also, we've seen, or I'm just asking how possible it is for us to transfer the technology that have been developed in high-income countries for the need of low-income countries, and what are the challenges and opportunities in these contexts. Dr. Pradhan talked about some in the context of health or training people. Dr. Neupane also kind of referred to it, but there must be other challenges and opportunities, so I want to spend some time talking through it.
Okay. Well, when we think about challenges, I think one of the issues I see is, let me put it this way, when I meet people, when I have conversations with people about technology, and when I talk about technology, I'm talking about information technology, and of course these technologies are, you know, they're invented in the West, and then we're just trying to adopt. Here is the issue, you know. There are some people, they're really, really excited. And I think sometimes they're overexcited with technology. Right? They have very little knowledge. They don't ask questions. You know, they just think the technology will just bring miracle. That's not helpful either. That's a challenge. You know, in the short time, you're happy when you talk about some new idea, new technology to people. You know, of course, you like people if they say, "Okay, great," you know, but that's actually dangerous. But there are other kinds of people who are really pessimist. You know, they have very little knowledge about the technology again, but they're not excited. I think both of these are challenges. We need to overcome them. So we need people who you know, who attempt to use technology cautiously. That's one challenge. I have seen. Let me give you an example, because examples are sometimes helpful. I also, you know, I had worked for the government before I started my PhD. You know, I used to work with the Ministry of Land, and Nepal's Neupane Malput. By the way, you know, this is you handle massive data. Because land property is very important in Nepal. So our government decided to use computer technology to automate the land acres. That was they started in 1992. And we do have national plans. You know, we have 5-year national plan, 5th national plan, 6th national plan, and I don't know, you know, which national plan we are running now. And they said this, and I was a new, very young computer engineer in the ministry then. And it was, I think it was the 5th national plan that mentions Nepal's all district Malput and Napis will be computerized in the next 2 years. That has been written in our 5th, I think in 8th, one of the national plans. And that we haven't been able to complete that task from 92 to now 2018. How many years? So I'm just giving you a challenge.
We have a lot of mathematicians, you know, in the room.
Yeah, I want, you know, I want people to think about it. And what I'm telling here, you just go to Google and spend some time and ask these questions. So something that we wanted to complete in 2 years hasn't been completed in how many years? Nearly 30 years. That's the reality. Okay? That's the challenge. And non-government sectors might be a little better, but I don't think, you know, and I don't know about the private sector, but I've seen information systems, you know, facing similar situation in many sectors, you know. So I can't tell you, you know, I can't exactly where, you know, what is the problem here, you know. But we do have challenge.
Yeah, we touched up on a couple here. We talked about attitude of local people or anyone who's transferring the technology can be overtly optimistic and not think about the local context. So context is important. It also seems like government or governance, having a stable government that can deliver what it plans on. So having a group of policy maker who can promise what they're gonna achieve is important. So you can't overpromise or underpromise. And then we also talked about just this slow adoption of technology. Like we might not be as fast at other people.
You already do have a paper here. What are the challenges of implementing
Yeah.
the technology? But I think that would make a very good research. What are the challenges? Because our academic institutions do not, I don't think, they have focus in research. They just teach. So so we have challenges. But
Clearly.
but we do have I understand your question was part of your question was is it possible to use technology that is developed in the developed countries? I think so, but it depends upon which technology we are talking about. What is the goal of the technology? Every technology has designers' intent embedded within it. Those designers are from there. They have their own worldview, right? If somebody is designing this door, for example, probably our civil engineers have kept Nepalese height in mind. They keep that in mind and design the height of the door, for example. So what I'm saying is every technology is designed by somebody, conceptualized by somebody. That somebody is human, and that human is that person was born somewhere. That person grew somewhere. He does have that social, that contextual things, and that is somehow that influences the design process. But again, what I would say there are certain technologies probably we might be able to use as it is. There might be other technologies that we might be able to use by some changes, but in other cases, that technology might not solve our problem. Probably we have to think in a different way. So it might, I still abstract, but that's my big response.
Yeah, so let's spend some more time talking through this then. I'd like other panels to join in and also maybe add what are the things we need to think about when we are adopting technologies from one context to another. Dr. Pradhan has a lot of experience working in African countries, in sub-Saharan African countries, so when she visits America or other high-income countries and then think about transferring technologies and ideas from there to sub-Saharan Africa for their contextual need, what are the things that comes to your mind?
I think the biggest challenges are designs that are not context specific and sustainability. Because in almost every developing country, for example, the government invests some money, not a lot, but some money in health, education, public sector. But there's also development partners, multilateral organizations like the World Bank, WHO, DFID, all of these organizations that invest in the public sector, right? So financial resources are an issue, but they're not the biggest issue. So designs that are not context specific, one, I think that's a big one. And lack of scalability. So there are a lot of pilots that are done by academics, by NGOs that show that something works, but to take it from one village to 5,000 villages, that is eventually supposed to have an impact. That's where the gap is. The other gap is, I think, it's not political will per se, but it's called low political equilibrium, which means governments that are not stable, government employees, that really, they're human beings, right? They have their own worries. They perhaps may get water once a week for 2 hours at a time. They might have children in school that are not doing so well in school. They might need to stand in line for 5 hours to get 2 liters of petrol. So, you know, when you say low political equilibrium and when you say that government workers aren't doing their best, I mean, they're doing the best that they can, given the political equilibrium that they exist in, right? So interventions can support development, but I don't think they can be fully transformative unless these fundamental issues like governance, they're fixed. And of course, technology has a role in improving governance as well. But there's a lot more to be done there. I think just knowing, so I think this was Gagan Thapa who, when he was the Minister of Health, asked this very simple question to his colleagues in the ministry: how many doctors and nurses do I have in the country? And the ministry had no answer to that. The Ministry of Health did not know how many doctors and nurses they employed, right? So when such basic gaps in data exist, then even, you know, seemingly capable people, when they enter into the public sector, they have a very difficult time employing that change. So, you know, human capital, I think Nepal has a lot of human capital compared to many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and even Southeast Asia. I think we're doing very well in health. We're doing very well in education. I don't remember this exactly, but for example, in the US, if you look at the number of students who are studying in the US from outside, in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, number of Nepali students ranked 4th if you just count, you know, number of students. I mean, हाम्रो population, if we count our population, it's 130th largest country, right? But we have a lot of people with college degrees that are educated. So human capital is not necessarily an issue in Nepal, in India as well. But they are, in fact, an issue in a country like Cambodia, for example, where even if the government wanted to completely reform their education sector, about 10% of the country has college education, so they can't find teachers, right? So a lot of these issues differ from country to country. But if I were to talk about Nepal, I think the biggest gaps are in implementation science. It's called implementation science, which means technology already exists, but you need to think about how to make it context specific, and you need to think about how to scale it up. So the biggest gap is in implementation science, and then the second biggest gap is this low-level political equilibrium that we exist in.
So Dr. Neupane wants to add something.
You can call me Sujaya. Dr. Neupane sounds weird when you say it. I think the challenge is empowerment. So what do I mean by that? I think we tend to ignore the need when we're trying to solve a problem or do something to develop or help the society. We're trying to make lives better of a certain group of people or some community or country. But what is needed is usually decided by someone not belonging to the community. So whether it's the foreign donor agency or the prime minister or the MP or the minister that defines, right? And well, since it's a democratic government, one can argue that it's a democratic process of making that decision. But but how democratic is the democratic process of the election and government? And the other side is you can go ask the people, right? And now I think more and more people are realizing that that there has to be a clear need assessment before we even start doing something. Now the challenge is, once you go and, so you know, one obvious thing to do is go and ask the people, right? What is the problem? What is needed here? The challenge is you'll get absolutely no answer right away. You ask something and no one will say anything. And you ask, is this good? They'll say, yeah, everything is good. We're fine. People have been in the margin for so long that they're resilient. They're used to living in the margin, and they have given up on complaining or doing anything. They have figured out a way to live. So no one's going to talk. And this is, so I have to cite my sister's work. She's doing a PhD in public health, and most of my knowledge comes from her social science work. So I'll give you one example. There was Sudani program in Nepal up until late 1980s. Sudanese are midwives, yeah. So they are trained to go to homes to deliver babies, right? And there was a formal educational program for this, and this was everywhere in Nepal. And the government and there was a general agreement that birthing should not happen in homes. They should be happening in sanitary areas. So everyone was required to go to a birthing center to give birth. And Sudani program was abolished, and there was birthing center that was established in almost every villages in Nepal. Now, 2 years ago, when my sister went to a village in Jimpa, and she was doing participatory research with people and asking questions, it turns out that people living in the margin, so what I mean by this is, the way Nepali villages are organized are there are villages scattered on the slope of hills, and there's a river in the valley. And usually, depending on which social class you belong to, you live closer to the valley or away from the valley. So you can imagine on the top of the hills, which is very far from the valley where most of the resources are, most of the so-called untouchable caste lives. So she was interviewing this girl who was 16 and she was pregnant. And there's no way she can go to a birthing center if she goes into labor. And there were a number of other cases of women who gave birth at home, and there was obviously no Sudani because there were no Sudanese anymore. So now we can ask this question of, were they consulted before abolishing the Sudani program? And okay, it was abolished, but are they now consulted on asking how the birthing center has helped them? So we didn't really know. And even the troubling question is, when you make a metric of infant mortality or maternal mortality, are these births taken into account? Because they go unreported, right? They don't get reported. So when you see an increase in maternal mortality, decrease in maternal mortality rate after this program was abolished and birthing center was established, it looks pretty nice, but what if these numbers were not included? So my point is, need assessment is very important, but once you go and start doing that, it's very hard, because no one's going to speak because they've been living in the margin for so long. So this is a really deep social problem that we have to think of before even we start. So I guess my point is, let's not start with technology. Let's start with the problems we have, and then maybe technology will help.
That's a great point. So on that note, I also want to open this conversation to the audience in the room. We've talked about a lot of challenges here, and we'll steer towards opportunities. So because where there are challenges, it can also be thought of as opportunities that needs work. So if anyone has anything to add to this conversation or question for our panelists, you're welcome to chime in.
No filming though, if the question is bad. So I would like to hear the ideas of the panel on a point that was mentioned in the beginning. So I think, as Samrachana said, everyone seems to agree that the goal has to be to make the lives of low-income countries better, right? So that how we measure, let's say, the 10% lowest income people, if they get better. But one thing that I think when we talk about sustainable goals, a problem is that I think it's not really a doubtful question. Is high income and even mid-income countries are actually in a very unsustainable situation. It's not a lifestyle that we can keep on living. So to what extent do we need to kind of figure out how we find a common ground of living that is actually sustainable and not basically tell everyone, let's run faster into the wall?
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know the answer. I think one problem I see being from Nepal, I guess, is we don't have a habit of criticizing what we import. I think it, I like the point that she said about knowledge can be transferred from low income to high income or high income to low income, right? Knowledge can be transferred both ways. But that, we don't really see that happening at all in low income setting. You take any product, if it's from high income country, it's automatically better than that was produced here, right? Maybe it is better, but I don't think there's a serious analysis on reaching that decision. Same thing with ideas and proposals about sustainable development and the future. So my theory is that why that is the case is because I think it's the effect of colonization. We are in a post-colonial world, but the remnants of colonization goes very deep. We tend to think that what we do is somehow subpar to what is done in the West. That we have to improve on our side. But there's also things to improve on the high-income country side, right? They have. I mean, everyone says this, but no one is. I don't think people are really doing it in practice. I mean, the idea of white man's burden, that because there is money in high-income country, their ideas should work. That notion should just go away. I mean, everyone agrees to this, but we can see a lot of this happening in practice. So there's work to do on both sides, but I don't really know how how we can convince people to do this. How do we even start on this practice?
I don't have much to add to that.
मेरो क्वेसन चाहिँ डाक्टर बुढाथोकी हजुरलाई 1992 मा फेस गर्नुभएको प्रब्लम जुन थियो अहिलेसम्म त्यो सल्भ भएको छैन अब डिफ्रेन्ट 5 इयर्स प्लानमा पनि देखिया छ तर स्टिल एक्जिक्युसनमा आएन भन्नुभयो होइन त्यो एउटा आइरोनी पनि भयो अर्को चाहिँ रिसेन्टली जुन तपाईँहरूले सुरु गर्नुभयो ओपन स्टेट म्याप त्यसपछि ओपन डेटाको जुन एडभोकेसी गर्नुभएको छ यसमा चाहिँ गभर्मेन्टको एज अ पोलिसी वाइज तपाईँहरूलाई कस्तो सपोर्ट भयो अथवा अहिले आइसोलेट भएरै गइरहनु भएको छ कि गभर्मेन्टको बाइन लिएर गइरहनु भएको छ कि अब यसको सस्टेनेबिलिटी कसरी सोच्नु भएको छ रिजन किन भन्दाखेरि हामी पनि एउटा सानो ओपन सोर्सको मुभमेन्ट सुरु गर्दैछौँ अब पछि हामीले यसले चाहिँ पोलिसी इन्फ्लुएन्स गराउन सक्छौँ कि सक्दैनौँ सकेन भने हामी फेरि सस्टेन कसरी हुने त्यो चाहिँ हजुरको एक्सपिरियन्स सुन्नु मन लाग्यो थ्याङ्क यू
नेपालीमा बोले हुन्छ गभर्मेन्ट को सपोर्ट भन्नाले अब हामीले गभर्मेन्टलाई त्यो थाहा छ भुइँचालो आउनुभन्दा धेरै अगाडि पनि हामीले यहाँ म्यापिङमा काम गर्ने त नापी विभाग भन्ने छ होइन अनि उहाँहरू कहाँ भेटघाट गर्ने हामीले गएर त्यसको प्रेजेन्टेसनहरू दिने अनि विभिन्न वर्कसपहरूमा गभर्मेन्टबाट चाहिँ डिरेक्टर जेनरल नापी विभागको आफै पनि आउनु भएको छ सो उहाँहरूलाई थाहा छ अब एउटा तपाईँको सपोर्ट भने अब आजभोलि बानी के अलि धेरै सोच्ने बानी परेछ कि सपोर्ट भन्नाले एउटा चाहिँ त्यो किसिमले सपोर्ट अलिकति सपोर्टै भनौँ होइन उहाँहरूलाई थाहा छ थाहा हुने सपोर्ट हो कि होइन आई डोन्ट नो आई लिभ इट टु यु अब उहाँहरूको एक्सनको कुरा चाहिँ के छ भने अब हाम्रो गभर्मेन्ट भने इज बिग इन्स्टिट्युसन इट डज हेभ म्यासिभ इनर्सिया हामी तपाईँ के ब्याकग्राउन्ड हो भने फिजिक्समा इनर्सिया भन्छौँ क्या बढी अब्जेक्ट ठुलो भयो भने त्यो मुभ हुन्न नि त्यसको आफ्नो इनर्सिया हुन्छ नि अब उहाँहरूको कुरा सुन्दाखेरि कुरा हुँदाखेरि त्यो उहाँहरूलाई मनपर्छ यो जे भइराखेको छ होइन उहाँहरू पनि ओपन स्ट्रिमको डाटा युज गर्नुहुन्छ फेरि तर अफिसियली नै छ नि उहाँहरूले मैले एक दुईवटा प्रपोजल भनेको थिएँ उहाँहरूलाई तपाईँहरू यो डाटाको क्वालिटी एसेसमेन्ट गर्नुहोस् यो क्राउडले जनताले बनाएको डाटा यसको क्वालिटी पहिला एसेसमेन्ट गर्नुहोस् अनि क्वालिटी एउटा लेभलमा छ भने त्यसलाई कसरी युज गर्ने फेरि सफल गरौँला भनेको थिएँ मैले अनि आइडिया ठिक हो त भन्नुहुन्छ अब त्यसले गर्नुभएको छैन होइन एनिवे मैले यसलाई त्यति नै त्यहीँ राखौँ अब त्यो नापी विभागको कुरा भयो तर अरू गभर्मेन्टको चाहिने त्यहाँ अलिकति अरू सेक्टरहरूमा जस्तै अहिले म्युनिसिपल गभर्मेन्टहरू चाहिने वास्तवमा दे आर मोर एक्साइटेड एउटा के भने म्युनिसिपल गभर्मेन्टसँग आफ्नो त्यो म्याप डाटाको सोर्स पनि छैन उहाँहरू त्यो आफै बनाउन सक्ने उहाँहरूमा त्यो क्यापेसिटी पनि छैन। अब यो त फ्रीली चाहिँ अभाइलेबल हो नि यो होइन। अनि उहाँहरूको अनि खास गरी चाहिँ नि मेयरहरूलाई चाहिँ के छ भने त्यो डाटा भन्दा पनि इट्स भेरी इन्ट्रेस्टिङ कि तपाईँहरू चाहिँ डाटा भन्छ ओपन स्ट्रिम अफ डाटामा हाम्रो ध्यान छ। तर उहाँलाई चाहिँ त्यो युथको इन्गेजमेन्टमा इन्ट्रेस्ट छ कि उहाँहरूलाई, किनभने युथको इन्गेजमेन्ट चाहिँ इज भोट इज कन्भर्सेसन विथ द यङ पपुलेसन, द्याट्स वाट पोलिटिसियन्स आर एक्साइटेड टु ह्याभ होइन। त्यसैले अब त्यो हिसाबमा चाहिँ नि लोकल गभर्मेन्टहरूले सर्टेन अब धेरै भएको छैन, उहाँहरू पनि भर्खर त आउनु भने त्यो पिक गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ होइन। अब मेरो भनाइ त के छ भने गभर्मेन्टले एउटा पोलिसी ल्याएर छ नि ओपन स्ट्रिम अफ डाटाले चाहिँ समाजको जम्मै निड गभर्मेन्टको जम्मै निड मिट गर्ने त होइन। देयर आर सर्टेन काइन्ड्स अफ निड द्याट दिस डाटा हेज ए पोटेन्सियल टु मिट होइन। त्यसको लागि चाहिँ नै गभर्मेन्टले एउटा पोलिसी नै ल्याएर छ नि, बिकज लो कस्ट अलमोस्ट फ्री छ, नभए थोरै पैसामा पनि बनाउन सक्छ, त्यो गरौँ भन्ने छ। अब अलिक बल पुगेको छैन हामीलाई, अब तपाईँहरू पनि ओपन सोर्समा त्यो के गर्दै हुन्छ अब पछि कुरा गरौँला होइन। आई थिङ्क we should unite our forces. अब तपाईँले सोधेको प्रश्न बृहत छ, I could continue talking for hours.
I think we can take it offline. Yeah.
I also just briefly want to summarize this conversation for our non-Nepali speakers in the audience. That's okay, we can discuss in Nepali. But so the question was about support of government in the context of open source related work, especially pertaining to Dr. Budathoki's experience in OpenStreetMap. And our audience member is also involved in open source related initiative. And there was a very important thing that you touched upon, which was, he said there might not be a lot of interest or support from the government in the data sector, like OpenStreetMap has a lot of potential and resources, but what local governments seem to be interested about now is youth engagement and policy related to it. And I see that as one of the silver linings, which could potentially help us build this youth resources or empower them in the future. So that was the good point, but still they're not as involved and we need a lot of changes in policies.
Okay, last few questions, maybe 2 or 3 at most.